It's 12 o'clock Greenwich. Meantime, here's a summary of the news.
Bloopers. At this time each week, Jonathan Hewat, a senior lecturer in radio, browses through his personal archive of moments when the broadcasters wished they were anywhere but in front of a microphone.
Hello.
Angus McDermott, BBC, at the... Sorry, skip the payoff. Don't know where I am.
I know the feeling, but knowing where you are is only one of the golden rules of good broadcasting.
At least get your facts right, for goodness sake. The old broadcaster's prayer used to be, Ted, and I think it certainly applies in your case, embrace your game before you open your mouth.
Another golden rule of the radio is that you watch your language in any place where there's a microphone. Always.
It's 10 o'clock.
There's renewed police activity around the refuse site in Hucknall where an armed gunman is keeping officers at bay. Annie Hitchcock reports from the scene.
The shed where Bell is holed up is surrounded by what's described as a refuse amenities site. The building's... bollocks.
A 28-year-old man is being questioned by police.
Of course, sometimes the language is inadvertent.
For sale, a Syndico orange-striped baby buggy with wind and rain. I do apologise.
Today, along with our phone call of the week and the usual eavesdropping in the BBC Club bar, the main topic is journalism. Fast-moving, split-second stuff from start to finish, and accurate too.
But that a man is likely to appear in court in Stroud a bit later today, and the charge is likely to be something like trespassing with an arm of some sort. How does that sound right at all? It's ridiculous. Trespassing with a firearm. That's it.
Right. Some stations take the news desperately seriously. Others are a bit more laid back in their approach.
9 o'clock, and I'll read you the news when I can find it. At the moment, I've lost it. OK, I found it. Here we are. The Prime Minister has tried to allay fears in parts of Northern Ireland.
In Southern African radio, they have a tendency to give their listeners only the bare facts.
It's 11 o'clock on the English service. And here is the news. I beg your pardon. Here is the news read by Stella Hare.
Well, at least she got her own name right. Not as easy as it sounds if you're ambitious.
Across North Yorkshire and around the world, this is Radio York from the BBC.
Norman Lamont denies calling John Major weak and hopeless, and a senior local politician says the government should scrap plans to redraw the county map. BBC News at 11 with John Major.
The main goal of all newsreaders is getting each story totally correct, in every way.
After a 6-month silence, Big Ben in the clock tower at the Houses of Parliament is to sound the hours once again. A new hammer was forged and has now been installed in the clock mechanism to strike 13. No, it never struck 13, it's to strike the 13-ton bell.
Flags are flying at half-mast in Manchester in tribute to the city's football legend Sir Matt Busby, who died yesterday. A steady stream of fans has been arriving at Old Trafford, creating a shrine of flowers to the man Busby babe Noel Cantwell says led by example.
I'm not even sure if all of that was in English, but then we are in Europe.
Ces deux partis s'opposent à toute décision des pourparlers de paix à Washington qui pourrait mener à une autonomie palestinienne. Leur décision de se retirer du gouvernement priverait de sa majorité. Pardon.
Mr. Wheeler recognises the political difficulties involved in any legislation affecting public order. He comments that in a free society, any political group must be free to meet at election time in support of its nominated candidates, however loathsome their wives may be. Their views may be, rather.
The writing of news stories, and therefore getting the grammar correct, is one of vital importance to all journalists.
And when he arrived at the airport in Nairobi, he was carrying with him not only sort of normal insignia of his rank, such as a cap and his sword and so on, but he was also lumbered with various other pretty hurriedly assembled items of baggage, and his wife.
One thing all broadcasters dread more than anything is silence.
Reports are coming in of a series of bomb explosions in the centre of Belfast. More details. soon.
There's one thing that's worse than silence.
23 minutes to 9, and if you hear some extremely strange knocking, I know we were talking about Macbeth earlier, but it sounds as if the phantom porter is at the door. Expect him to walk in at any minute. Anyway, hope you can still hear us. The firefighters of Hereford and Worcester are the first to take on the government on changes in fire regulations.
These momentary lapses are, of course, rarities and are only made special by the incredibly high standards of normal radio broadcasting. Though, if a news story does fall apart, for whatever the reason, it's generally thought to be better to move on to the next item as rapidly as possible.
It's 8 o'clock. A Dorset man said today firemen ignored his suggestion to check the house where an elderly man died after... I'm sorry, I'll just read that again. A Dorset man said today firemen ignored his suggestion to check the house where an elderly man died after ignoring a request to check the home of a man who later died at his house. I'm sorry, what the man is saying is that he asked the firemen to go to this house and they ignored his warning. That is what he's saying. His name is Jason Head, and he's called for an investigation. No, I'm sorry, he said he called... I can't read this story.
No problem. It's best to move quickly on to the next item in the bulletin.
I'm awfully sorry. What this man is basically saying is that he told the fireman to go into this house where a pensioner later died, but the fireman, he says, apparently ignored this request of his. His name is Jason Head. He broke into the adjoining semi to his house to find that his neighbour had collapsed in a smoke-filled house.
One nightmare that faces every newsreader is forgetting to go to the studio on time. It's worse if the news studio is several floors above the newsroom. And it's worse still if the studio is automatically put on the air by the main presenter somewhere else in the building.
News.
And when Jamie leaves for Hollywood later this year, there are sure to be a lot of applicants for her job. Hi, you in a big rush?
I'm supposed to ring the 4:30 headlines, oh my God.
This is Jonathan.
When something starts going a bit wrong, the gremlins keep coming. And of course, when there's an audience of around 10 million people, it's not difficult to discover the colour of adrenaline.
Now, I'd like to give you details concerning tomorrow's programmes on BBC World Service. There'll be a special edition of Outlook, beginning at 16:15 Greenwich Mean Time, when John Tidmarsh reports... Sorry about that interruption. When John Tidmarsh will be reporting on life in the American capital, Washington. That's tomorrow. A special edition of Outlook, beginning at 16:15 Greenwich Mean Time. This is London. At this point, we would normally have what we call our news prelude signature tune. It's called Lilli Bolero, and if you were listening just under a minute ago, you may have heard a little burst of it. Stand by, we hope we'll get some Greenwich time signal pips. £17, Greenwich Mean Time.
A ballpoint pen on an angle poised lamp could only be described as a touch of genius. Now then, what's next? I think a drop of something in the BBC Club Bar and maybe an overheard story or two recalling some of those not too happy broadcasting memories.
There was one, actually. We were doing the JY Prague from Jerusalem, and the line to London went down about halfway through the programme. And anyway, I got this urgent call to go into the box next door, which I did. And we did the last half of the programme, we did on an ordinary payphone on the wall. And, well, that was slightly hairy, but the hairiest bit of all happened when we came back home, because the engineers, I mean, BBC engineers are marvellous, and they managed to made the quality so good that when we got back, of course, nobody would believe that the line had gone down and we'd done it on a phone. So that was the most upsetting bit of all.
Well, Jim, you talk about that. I remember when I was in commercial radio, long time before I was reading the news on Radio 2. It was a local commercial radio down in Bournemouth. And, of course, they take any opportunity they can to go out on outside broadcasts. And we went on one occasion to the local 10-pin bowling alley, where they were having a big reopening because they'd refurbished the alley. I should explain at this point that I am not good at any form of sport. So my lunchtime show between 12 and 2 was taken down to this special reception that was being held, lunchtime reception, all the important people coming along to see the reopening of this. And in order to assist me with any difficult interviews I might have to do with sports people who might have been there, my very good friend and co-presenter, Richard Gwynne, came down with me. There was going to be a match, a playoff between the two mayors, the mayor of Bournemouth and the mayor of Poole, and Richard, God bless him, did his usual sort of the sporting bit, and now we see the mayor picking up the first ball, and he's about to bowl it, at which point I said, "And how many balls does the mayor have, Richard?" There was a lovely beat pause before he said, "Well, Fran, the mayor has 2 balls."
Apart from using the right words, it's also pretty important to make each question as brief and concise as possible.
Now, obviously, Reverend, you don't like the idea of these prep schools being used as fashionable schools for middle-class parents, but do you really think that it matters whether or not they believe, the parents themselves, in a Christian education as such? I mean, would you be happy if they particularly wanted and believed that the Christian or the Anglican sort of education was right for their kids? Would you like to see the church schools remain in that case, as long as you were convinced of their sincerity, rather than the fact that they were doing it simply because it was a middle-class fashionable thing to do?
That's a very good question. I don't know.
Broadcaster 0, church 10. But there's always a possibility of revenge, one way or another.
Well, Anne, what have you got in store for us next week? Who's going to be in the hot seat?
Well, in fact, it's the Reverend Brandon Jackson, who at the moment is the vicar at St. Peter's in Shipley, and I'm tackling him, not tickling him, on the subject of the position of women in the Christian church.
Today's phone call of the week is very brief. It's a crossed line broadcast live on American radio. What's extraordinary is that it clashed with the technological wizardry of the very first human flight into outer space, in Apollo.
Okay, and Charlie, if you see any more of those subtle marks, how about calling them and just call them a subtle mark? We'd like to record that information. Okay. Hello. 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 Oye. Vaya, me oye. Sí. Until I can remember. Estamos dando 600. ¿Pero el canal 10? This is Apollo Control. The mysterious comments and singing, frequent repetition of hello, hello on the public affairs broadcast line a few moments ago has been identified by the network controller as a telephone company technician in Spain who inadvertently somehow got patched over onto the network line coming from the tracking station on the air-ground circuit. He has been isolated, electronically that is, and hopefully we shouldn't have any more of that sort of thing.
And that's it for now. Time for me to ship out, as they say in the best programmes.
It seems the word is out that no longer will Britain's women accept a pair of old jeans and a sense of humour. Instead, their men must ship up or shape out. But for now, from all of us, goodbye.
Same again next week? Lovely. The topic will be music, classical, specialist and popular. And, of course, the presenters who try to bring it to you. Don't fail to miss it, will you?
And from the British Broadcasting Corporation, you heard World Roundup. This is Bob Berry in London.
Bloopers was an independent production devised, produced and presented by Jonathan Hewat.